So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, welcome back for part 3 of Dragons or Dinosaurs. This one is The Revenge, and if you get that reference, then you've seen some pretty bad movies in your time.
Yeah, definitely.
So we last left off, and these creationists were starting to talk about things like the age of the Earth. Hello, everybody. So hello to Joseph Grant, Adam Morgan, Age Desert Rat, Henry Hutanen. Welcome. Also, I want to say, Adam, thank you for grabbing some Dapper Dino merch. I definitely want to see pictures of it, because I don't actually own any of it. However, every time someone buys some and they send me a picture, it's always like, oh, that actually came out really well. So I just want to make sure that Teespring is still doing a good job on all the things that they're making. So yeah, if you got the Dapper Dino fleece blanket, man, send me a picture of that when it gets in, because so far I've been very impressed with their mugs and their pillow. Someone bought the pillow that has the same picture from the fleece blanket on it. And by the way, that fleece blanket has like a 10K resolution image on it. I went a little crazy. It took quite a while. So you're getting a very quality image of Dapper Dino on that one. So just thought Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
What surprised you?
I actually am very surprised by the fact that you do not actually even own any of your merchandising.
I can't spend money on that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's basically it. It's like I don't have a mug budget right now. I have a food budget. And if it's outside of food, I'm probably not spending anything on it. Well, I think the last thing I bought that wasn't food was there was a video game that I wanted to play, and it was 75% off, and it was $5. And I was like, all right.
Not bad.
I'll spend $5 on a game. And that was, yeah. So, let's get into this, because we only have so much time, because I have my scheduled Dungeons & Dragons game later.
All right, let's dig right in.
You know, radiometric dating is seen as the linchpin of the evolutionary age of the Earth. They say, oh, all these radiometric dating techniques show the Earth is ancient, so how can you believe in a young Earth? Well, actually, what I do is I appeal to known lava flows. Go to Hawaii, sample a lava flow.
I'm not seeing the... documentary on my...
I'm sorry. Yeah, so we just got to the point where he's talking about going to known lava flows, and I'm going to fix that right now.
I'm also not tearing in on my part.
Yeah, no, you should be good now.
Okay.
Sample some basalt that's come out of the Earth. Bring it back to your laboratory. Tell me what age you measure. It's not going to be 0. It's not going to be even a few thousand years old. You're going to get an old age.
Yeah, because all those techniques are only accurate within, a few 100,000 years, or in some cases, a few million years. The ones that you look for in, like, rubidium, strontium, potassium, argon, what is it? Lead-208, all this stuff, right? They have a certain amount of specificity, and if you give an age 0 sample, they're just going to peg low and give you a date range that is somewhere around the absolute minimum, which could still be 1 million or 2 years. Like, saying, oh, hey, this lava from 3 years ago dated 2 million years old isn't going to negate the fact that asteroid over there, or this lava flow from some Archean, igneous intrusion, dated 3 billion years old. Like, that's... You can't do it that way. Morning, Monk Mayfair. Welcome to the stream. TD Lane, nice to have you here, everybody. Oh, Vandalia 1998 is here. So we have... we got some of our valued regular viewers. So let's keep going with this. You can hear it and see it now?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what technique you use. So what that does is that takes the idea that you can measure the difference between the daughter product and the parent product and calculate an age as if there was a clock. That discredits anything that's using the assumption that there's zero daughter products.
Well, I was involved in a
What, the assumption that there's zero daughter products in what? In the original rock? I mean, and yeah, so radiocarbon, this is from Brandon, radiocarbon dating is about 50,000 limit, and that's true. And to be fair to most creationists, the ones who bring lava samples to have them dated, they don't usually ask for radiocarbon dating because, well, for one thing, a lot of labs wouldn't even bother if it's obviously inorganic material because there's no point. But yeah, even radiometric dating, or carbon dating, which is our shortest timescale radiometric dating technique, already disproves the 6,000-year-old timescale. And I think they're going to try and say that there are ways to change the decay rates, but I want to see if they do.
project called the RATE project, RATE. It stands for radioisotopes and the age of the Earth. It was an acronym that we put together to describe so people.
Okay, I don't know if anyone here is very familiar with the RATE study. Eric, are you?
Say what? Sorry?
Are you terribly familiar with the RATE study that the creationists did?
Not really,
Okay.
to be really honest with you.
No, hey, that's fine. So, the thing about the RATE study is they did this study to try and prove that you could change the radiometric, or sorry, the radiometric decay rates of various radioisotopes. They failed to actually change any of them. Then they said, given current models in physics, these radiometric dating techniques do indicate an old Earth, but if physics were just different-y, then it doesn't. And it's like, okay, so you spent this time testing radiometric isotopes, sending things off to labs, doing all these research things, and your conclusion was, well, no, the Earth is old, but we don't want it to be, so we'll just pretend that physics can be different.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, it's like, you can't just pretend like how something works. I mean, that's not how science works. And someone even pointed out in the comments that it's not a very good acronym. And yeah, I could definitely see why. It's because of the fact that, that after, the radioisotopes, they have to put, like the crap, I'm having a brain fart because I'm so tired. They had to put like the and oh
yeah, it's like, shouldn't it be ratate or like ratate or something? But then again, if you look at some of the quote unquote acronyms that like NASA uses and whatnot, they're pretty bad too. So I'm not going to fault them too much for having the bad acronym, but and yeah.
Yeah, maybe it was just the best what they could come up with. But at the same time, though, young Earth creationists have used a lot worse things than that.
Yeah.
Quickly identify what this project was, and it was conducted between 1997 and 2005, and we got some exciting evidences that confirm that the conclusion we came to was that the nuclear decay rates, radioactive decay rates, had been grossly accelerated at some time or times in the past.
You came to that conclusion not based on any evidence, but because you needed it to be true for your starting point to be reasonable. You started with the conclusion the Earth must be young, and then your final conclusion was, well, the only way that that's possible is if the nuclear decay rates changed. But you didn't actually provide any evidence that they had, nor did you get them to change. Plus, if they had changed by a factor that would allow all of this decay to happen within 6,000 years, it would just melt the planet. It's just not an option.
Yeah, and there's tons of other things that disprove a 6,000-year-old Earth, like the fact that there are cities like that are older than what they say the Earth is, or trees older than what they say the Earth is, and the fact, like we had got distant starlight,
Yeah.
knowing that they're millions of light years away, and that would be impossible on a 6,000-year-old Earth, but yeah.
Yeah.
At some event, the decay rates had been accelerated, that had been speeded up to such an enormous extent that you could essentially have hundreds of millions of years worth of nuclear decay measured by the rates at which they occur today, all of that happening within a few thousand years. So one of the best examples we came up with, well, there are several good ones. There were tiny crystals found in a granite in New Mexico from a drill hole. And essentially, when uranium decays to lead, the parent decays to the daughter lead, the byproduct is helium. And helium gas is...
Okay, one of the byproducts is alpha particles. It's a little nitpicky, I get it, because an alpha particle is a helium nucleus, but still. Emitting alpha particles is not the same as emitting atomic helium.
It's not. It's chemically stable. It doesn't react with other elements. It's what we call an inert element or inert gas. Because it's only got small atoms, it could leak very easily out of those crystals. But we found that the uranium lead date for these crystals, with the millions of years scenario, using the radioisotope dating, was 1.5 billion years. But most of the helium that would have been produced by that amount of nuclear decay was still in the crystals. So we made predictions. Then we sent the...
Does this guy realize that you can contain helium in a balloon? Like, solid structures retain helium pretty darn well. Helium, yeah, sure, it's one of it's the second smallest atom. But, like, if you encase helium in rock, it's not just gonna go float away. I mean, basically, if you have a gas canister that has helium in it, that's essentially the same thing as a rock. It's a bunch of tightly packed, crystallized atoms, or atoms in crystal arrangement. Helium doesn't just leak out of rocks at the rate that they think it does. They got the helium leakage rate wrong, is basically what this comes down to. And it's been well explained to creationists that the rate study did not actually measure the correct helium escape rate.
Crystals to a...
This guy, and sorry, but this guy claims to be a geologist?
I don't actually remember. It will probably flash up again.
Yeah, probably. I was going to say, if not, then, and then that's very, very telling.
Yeah.
Well-recognised laboratory who was well known for doing that work to actually measure the rate of leakage. And where did it fit? Exactly on the 6,000 year prediction. In other words, while the uranium to lead clock had ticked at the rate of 1.5 billion years, that's 1,500 million years, while uranium had been ticking through that rate, helium had been leaking at a different rate. That means because we know of the law of leakage of these atoms, well-known physical law that we can reproduce in the laboratory, that was a far more credible age determination method.
There was some basalt flows that erupted on the rim of the Grand Canyon, flowed down into the canyon all the way to the base of the canyon. That means that the lava flow is younger than the canyon.
Wait, are you aware of any such basalt flows into the Grand Canyon?
I've never heard of such a thing.
I'm not aware of any lava flowing into the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon isn't, as far as I know, really old enough for that to have happened because the volcanoes there aren't even active. I'll just leave it. You know what? I don't really want to Google it right now. So if anyone wants to, like one of my mods or something, if you can see if that's true, you can just Google it and see what you pop in. Because that sounds made up to me.
It definitely does. By the same time, though, you young Earth creationists have made up a lot of things, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
Younger than the uppermost sediments, and yet that lava flow dates to millions of years older than the canyon itself.
Did you show a
Really
picture
raises
of it?
the question.
Like, show a picture of it. This is clearly not it, if it exists, because this is a bunch of stratified stuff that doesn't have any overlying igneous intrusion going across it. I don't even know where that lava would come from.
How do we know that these techniques are valid?
We've got other lines of evidence. There was about 3 or 4 lines of evidence that we found that all pointed in the same direction, that the assumption of nuclear decay rates always being constant at the rates we measure today isn't true.
Actually, you didn't find any of that because no one has been able to get decay rates to measurably change more than a fraction of a percent under even the most extreme environments of pressure and heat. So, yeah. Plus, if decay rates were fast enough, what these guys are claiming is the case, then during these events where you have lava coming out, which some of which would have had to be in the flood, right? Because they're igneous intrusions all through the Phanerozoic era, or Phanerozoic eon, I guess? I don't remember. So all of this decay would have had to be taking place while Noah's trying to survive on what's now a radioactive boiling ocean. I'm sorry, but no.
That they were accelerated in the past, and that means the clocks can't be trusted.
We have done carbon-14 dating on coal and diamonds, which are hugely old. Diamonds are supposed to be over 1 billion years old, and yet we find carbon-14 in them.
Yep, because there are geological processes that are radioactive. Like, radioactive rocks are a thing. And when things like alpha decay or neutrons are emitted, which does happen, they can have nuclear processes with carbon in the ground that isn't that's quite old. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Nuclear processes happen in the ground, not just in the air. So it's not at the same levels as happens in the air because most carbon-14 is formed by a much faster method via radiation from the sun, but it still happens underground. So we should expect diamonds to have very low levels of carbon-14 in them.
Now, hang on, carbon-14 would have long just decayed if it were that old.
One of the discoveries that has really rocked the evolutionary world was made by Dr. Mary Schweitzer and Dr. Jack Horner from analyzing the interior, the bone marrow, if you will, of the thigh bone or the femur.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, but I said that this argument really needs to die already. And I feel so bad for Mary Schweitzer, especially by the fact that, you know, with this documentary, like that this is out in the public, which is misleading her work. I mean, that is only making it worse on her part. And oh man, I feel so sorry for her.
Yeah, it's it's annoying. And one of the things is, it must be especially annoying for her because she's one of the only living scientists that creationists are still picking on. Because a lot of times they're going after like, oh, Darwin said or Lord Kelvin said. And it's like, no one cares. Move on. Stop using 50, 60, 150-year-old claims that science no longer is taking seriously.
And probably the reason why they're really going after her is because of the fact that she takes the position of theistic evolution, as I do.
Yeah. I'm sure that they're not happy when it's pointed out that she's a former young Earth creationist who is now someone who fully accepts the old age of the Earth and evolution and that didn't mean that she just abandoned her religion? Yeah.
Of a T-Rex that was excavated back in 2003. Their report was published in the March-April 2005 edition of Science Magazine, a very prestigious, peer-reviewed science magazine. And they reported, and to my left are pictures, just a few pictures, there's many more that were actually in the magazine. They reported soft, stretchable, elastic, snap back like a rubber band tissue.
Right, after soaking it in acid for a week. So, I mean, there's that. It wasn't soft and springy when you crack open the bone. It's not like if you take a cow femur, pop it in your oven at a high temperature, it'll pop open and there's some nice soft marrow you can put on your toast. Not what happened.
Right, yeah, and this is one of the things I said during my debate with Cody. It's like that they think like that as if it was found, as if it was like roadkill, but no, it was found mineralized. It wasn't found soft, and what they ignore is the fact that all these peer-reviewed papers talk about how it was preserved under the right conditions. And what's so funny, what they also ignore about that, they are so much against dinosaurs evolving into birds, and yet, a lot of the discoveries with the soft tissue actually helps to support that, and so I just find that very, very funny.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is that when you protein sequence what are probably collagen, it comes out as being extremely similar to ostrich and chicken collagen. Almost like there's a relationship between dinosaurs and birds. So,
which is funny because they're all for being against that, and and they won't call a bird a dinosaur, but yet they'll call a crocodile a dinosaur, which I mean, crocodiles do come from the archosaur. They do come from archosaurs, but
right.
But yeah,
actually,
not dinosaurs.
I just recently had a video, things that aren't dinosaurs, episode 2, and it was on crocodilians. So
and yeah, actually, as a matter of fact, I saw that video, and you did a great job. And they also call plesiosaurs dinosaurs, pterosaurs dinosaurs. It's like,
oh hey, pterosaurs are going to be the subject of a future episode of things that aren't dinosaurs. Don't you worry.
Sweet.
Yeah.
In that thigh bone. In addition, they reported finding red blood vessels that still had blood cells in them that were identifiable.
They didn't report finding blood vessels or cells. They reported finding structures that were morphologically consistent with them, but not finding sufficient data to support the conclusion that they definitely were blood vessels and blood cells.
And all of that would be impossible.
Nope.
If this dinosaur died out 65 to 68 million years ago.
All right,
Clearly,
I want to. Okay, it never, ever, ever, ever has been the scientific consensus that things just cannot last a long time. It's like, do they not realize, like, even by their standards, even though 6,000 years ago isn't as long as 65 million years ago, I mean, it still is a long time. And so even by their own standard, it's like, okay, if things just cannot last a long time, well, then by their standard, we should not have any dinosaur fossils at all, like no mammoth fossils or anything. So again, they're shooting themselves in their foot. It's like you could play like a whole drinking game by how many times they do that in this documentary, and within 15 minutes, you will be drunk.
Oh, yeah, I do not recommend creationism-based drinking games, because any of the things that you recommend as the drink thing, it's always going to be something they do way too much. Because they say the same things over and over.
Counting other logical fallacies.
Yeah. And of course, it's not impossible, because one of the things is that a preservation mechanism is actually now fairly well known.
Science has shown this dinosaur died out very recently, and I would say perhaps as the
science does.
Well, yeah.
Result of the flood of Noah's day, just a matter of, say, 4,000 years ago.
Doctors Mary Schweitzer and Jack Horner are paleontologists. They study fossils. Specifically, they're interested in dinosaurs. In fact, I think you could call Jack Horner Mr. Dinosaur. I mean, he's
not doctor, so I guess, yeah, he's not Dr. Dinosaur. But we've already got one of those, and he's not a doctor either, so...
So, interesting fact about Jack Horner. Jack Horner actually came once to where I lived, of course, to talk about dinosaurs. This was back when I was in like the 4th grade, and I actually got the chance to meet him.
Yeah, creation-based drinking game. I don't want to die. Yeah, Bunk Mayfair, that's why I don't recommend creation-based drinking games.
Yeah, because, like I said, you'll be within less than 15 minutes by their logical fallacies.
You could drink whenever they get something right. That might actually work.
Hey, I didn't think of it that way.
yeah. So, because you always got to pick something that happens occasionally, but it can't be too frequent or you just die. So maybe drink whenever the creationist says something right. Because actually, you might have to add a few extra things in there because you might not get enough drinking in.
probably associated with the study of dinosaurs as much or more than anyone else that comes to mind.
Mary Schweitzer said that on one such test, she said she couldn't believe it until she'd done it 17 times.
Well, yeah, that's kind of how science is supposed to work. You get an unusual result, you keep going back to check it, because chances are it was a fluke if you can get one unusual result. So, yeah.
This is pretty thorough.
So most people are understandably shocked, and that includes certainly evolutionists, that you should find what appears to be fresh marrow. Still soft, still with blood vessels, still with red blood cells. More recently, they've gone beyond that. Schweitzer, working with other investigators, have looked at the biochemistry of the marrow, and they have indeed found protein fragments.
It's not marrow, is one of the things. It's not like you crack open this T-Rex femur and there's a bunch of juicy marrow. That's... okay.
All right, so the only way as to how their soft tissue argument, like, what honestly would work is if they found a T-Rex, like, say, in, like, the later Cenozoic era of rock layers, and if, and as if the soft tissue, like, wasn't mineralized and whatnot, then yeah, then their argument would work better. But the T-Rex was found in the Cretaceous rock layers, and of course, they don't believe in radiometric dating, and they don't understand how science works, so that it has to be repeatable. What they don't understand is, like, radiometric dating has been repeated numerous times.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's been repeated that many times and you still get the same result, you could definitely be pretty confident in that result.
Right. And also, we have for €5 from Jens van Broekhoven, thank you very much for your super chat. The error range for dating was never as bad as YEC's claim. And yeah, that's absolutely true. And one of the things that you almost never see creationists get into is isochron dating, which, to simplify it a little bit, because I don't want to do too deep of a dive, because I haven't researched enough to even feel comfortable doing that, but if you simplify it a little bit, basically you can take multiple radioisotopes and their decay products, and then see if you can actually fit the ratios closely to a line. And if that happens, if there's actually a fairly close fit between the isotopes and the line, because, it's the real world, there's always going to be some kind of weird thing happening with the data. But the closer they are to a line, the better evidence it is that, in fact, there hasn't been any contamination. So, radioisotopes haven't gone into the rock after it formed, nor have daughter products left if the isochron dating actually lines up. And if you look at the equations that are used to actually calculate the age using isochron dating, the initial conditions for the ratios end up canceling out, and if the data points are too outside of a line, there was contamination, and therefore either you need to use some of the uncontaminated options if you have enough, or you just can't successfully date this rock with radioisotope dating, which happens. So, yeah.
Now, not the whole protein, but protein fragments. Proteins usually don't remain completely undisturbed for a few thousand years, and of course we have no idea for 70 million.
Well, of course, the evolutionary naturalists who embrace the long ages of evolution, who maintain adamantly that man and dinosaur are separate by 65 million years, are very, very uncomfortable with these continuing discoveries of Mary Schweitzer. Tom?
No, they're not. And also, Mary Schweitzer is one of these quote-unquote materialists, who, by the way, isn't a materialist, who thinks that the Earth, or who knows that the Earth is billions of years old, and that this fossil was from about 66 million years ago. Because if I remember correctly, it was from the end Cretaceous Hell Creek Formation.
And what's so funny is that they're so gung-ho about how, this makes evolutionists uncomfortable, and that, and they're trying to avoid the evidence. But yet, I have been to so many science museums, including Museum of the Rockies, as I have mentioned before. They have exhibits about it.
Yeah.
And, The only ones that are uncomfortable about parts of the evidence is actually YECs, because, like I said, they ignore the evidence in that helps support evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Kay of Seattle, who was also a critic of the first study of Mary Schweitzer, said, and I quote, "This will either be nothing or the biggest revolution in paleontology ever."
Yeah, not because it's going to overturn the dating, but because it means that now you can do things like get protein sequences off of particularly well-preserved fossils that have certain taphonomic traits. That's the revolution.
It is super obvious that YECs do not understand preservation, which is funny. It's because, I do not want to give away any spoilers, so
Oh, okay. Well, and also I'm extremely confident that this is a quote of mine, and that Tom Kay is not being quoted in context here, and that they're misleading you about what he meant.
Yeah, but YECs do that quite often.
Oh God, it's terrible.
I would have to agree with the latter portion of his quote. This is one of the greatest paleontological discoveries ever.
Danny returned to his cave,
Here we go.
deep in thought.
Yeah.
What?
Wherever. They're all millions of years, millions of years, millions of years. Kids have been to see those movies that talk about dinosaurs. They might be fictional movies like Jurassic Park and so on, but at the same time, they still teach millions of years.
Ever since Darwin and Lyell,
Yeah.
that this idea of many, many millions.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, but, Ken Ham, there's a reason why that they say that. It's because whether he likes it or not, that's what the science points to. It's like we don't want to lie to them about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Of years is a philosophical necessity, but is certainly not found in science.
I mean, the main movers and shakers at the time were really striving to discredit the Bible.
No, a lot of them weren't. In fact, people like Lord Kelvin, who in fact was a creationist and a proponent of what you could now call intelligent design, calculated that the Earth must be at least 20 million years old, and that was based on just thermodynamics and him not knowing about radioactive decay. After he found out about it, he upped his estimates considerably because he realized it was an ongoing heat source in the core of the Earth that would continue to keep the core hot. So no, all of these long ages, this idea that the Bible chronology can't be literally true as a historical fact, that was discovered by Christians who didn't stop being Christians, for the most part. I mean, there were some agnostics and deists in the bunch, but the majority of this was done by believing Christians.
I mean, Lyell himself said that his stated goal was to free the world from Moses. And if that's a stated goal to free the world from Moses, he is actively trying to undermine the biblical account of creation.
So that's why we have to talk about the age of the earth issue if we want to talk about dinosaurs and humans, because these are two radically different views. And if the earth is young, then dinosaurs and man did live together. And the dragon legends are believable.
Paleontologists also.
Unbelievable.
Sorry, go ahead.
But these dragon legends are not believable. As I said in part one of them talks about it having the supernatural ability to change its face. There is no dinosaur. I mean, there is no evidence that dinosaurs ever had that ability.
Yeah.
And why in the world would any dinosaur need that ability anyway?
Exactly.
I believe, go ahead and fill in the gaps as they see them in the evolutionary timeline, going from monkeys to man, going from microbes to man. One of the things that
What's up? What about monkeys?
We didn't evolve from monkeys. Monkeys are just our modern day cousins.
I'm actually going to disagree with you on that one.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. All right, so New World monkeys, are they monkeys?
Oh well, it was just like with the way how he worded it. He is basically wording it as if we evolved from the monkeys around.
Oh yeah, no. The
monkeys.
Right. None of the monkeys that are around today are the ancestors of humans. But I am going to have to go ahead and say, hold on, let me close that. I had a Facebook chime because I forgot to close a Facebook window. So
that's right. But yeah, it's like monkeys and humans. I mean, of course, both of us like have evolved like from prehistoric primates, and of course, we have a relation with each other. But but what a lot of YECs and even some oldies, even some OECs don't realize is like that. Even though that we evolved from a common ancestor, it doesn't mean that we evolved directly from like the modern day monkeys of.
Yeah,
today.
there seems to be
How
this,
evolution works.
there seems to be this common misconception that like modern animals are somehow the ancestors of other modern animals, even though that can't be how it works. Like, it's like saying, oh, I'm descended from my third cousins. It's like, no, you're not. You both share a common ancestor several generations ago. You can't be descended from these people who are the same age as you. It's like, no. Now we're going to ignore some crazy goings on in like Alabama or something. So
does not make any sense.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Double Bin Twin, welcome. Oh, and the Evil Scotsman is here. Thank you very much for joining us.
If we
They
evolved from
find, though,
monkeys,
in the process of doing that,
Oh yeah, why are there still monkeys?
is that life is very complex. Whether it's dead life or living life, it is still extremely complex. And so that means they've got to have huge amounts of time in order to give people any idea at all that it's credible to go from microbes to man. And that's really, time is the magic bullet for the evolutionist.
I like how this has gone from let's talk about whether or not dragons that are reported in myths and whatnot are actually dinosaurs that came from the flood. We've completely gotten rid of that. Now we're going into evolution, which is actually a separate topic. Like, no matter how false evolution may or may not be, it doesn't actually make the dragon legends evidence of dinosaurs surviving in historical times. But hey, I mean, why try to make a coherent argument? You're a creationist, it doesn't matter.
It's a lot of time, which makes the impossible possible.
Old Earth, old universe even, but certainly old Earth, 4.5 billion years, is important to the evolutionist because they need a great deal of time for things to evolve by the evolutionary process, which would involve random changes due to mutations and natural selection. I would suggest it requires infinitely more time than the pittance of 4.5 billion years.
What does he base that on? Did you do like a mutation study, like to study mutation rates? Did you do some kind of study to determine how long it takes for organisms to optimize their fitness levels, how quickly environments can change, causing new selection pressures without, resulting in mass extinctions? Just saying that doesn't sound right isn't science. Saying, oh, I feel like that 4.5 isn't enough time. Okay, well, great. I feel like 4 minutes is right. Prove it.
I mean, it definitely is a lot of time. It's like, does he not realize that 4.5 billion is a pretty gigantic number? It's like, if he really feels confident in that, then, show us the studies.
Exactly.
You can't say it, show us the studies.
Right. And I mean, even if they were published in a creationist journal, at least there would be something to look at, rather than you just saying, it feels wrong.
I encourage them to think along the lines of Google years. That would be to the Google power. I mean, you need years that make billions look like nothing if you're going to try to attribute to chance even a single biologically useful protein.
Well, they say that over billions of years anything is possible, but would you ever expect someone to win the lottery every single day for 10 years straight? That's essentially the odds that they're claiming anything is possible.
No, I wouldn't. And you haven't successfully calculated the odds. Further, the odds of any of the things that happen, if you go about calculating, well, what are the odds that on the 25th of January, I would be here doing a live stream? We had to think, well, okay, let's start with what are the chances that I was born? Then we'll multiply that, so we got what are the chances that the particular spermatozoan is what entered that particular ovum, and what are the chances that that particular ovum was the one that was released during that particular estrus cycle, and then you can go back to both of my parents and keep on going back. And yeah, the chances of any of the things that happen are ridiculously tiny, but things have to happen. This universe will take a state at any given time. So yeah, that's not a problem. Fantastically improbable things are everything that happens.
If that happened, a court of law would call that guy guilty, send him to jail for the rest of his life because he's cheating. Even if they don't know how he's cheating, they would have to conclude that you are cheating because this is impossible.
I'm not positive about that's what would happen, but then again, I don't know of any court cases like that, so who knows?
So their idea that anything is possible is really ridiculous on the face of it.
Would require more time and material than is in the known universe to have ever evolved by chance.
Well, it's a good thing that evolution isn't just by chance then, isn't it? It follows things like the laws of chemistry, and selection pressure and natural selection are non-chance factors. So we don't have to rely on purely stochastic mechanisms for evolution.
Once you can buy all that and accept it, once you can accept photosynthesis having formed by chance, I don't see a hill of beans difference between believing it happened by chance in 6,000 years.
I mean, one of them is impossible. That's the difference. I mean, it's a pretty big difference. You might say it's hard to believe that it happened with chance mechanisms involved, because it wasn't by chance under anybody's estimate. But yeah, that still leaves it way more plausible than it is actually contradicted by all available lines of evidence. So,
versus 6 billion years. I mean, one's just as improbable as the other. We've reached a point where the p-values are so low that what's the difference? But evolutionists know that their arguments would be even less tenable to laymen if the times were shortened too much for them.
We say humans are very complicated and a sponge or a jellyfish would be very non-complicated. But it's really funny because a jellyfish, or at least the sea anemone, has got about the same number of protein coding genes as people.
Yeah, no one is saying otherwise. The complexity in most animals actually derives from things like embryological development, not from just the straight up number of proteins. So, okay. But no one is suggesting that a sponge or an amoeba is an example of the earliest or most basal life. That's the kind of thing that we get at the beginning of the Cambrian, but the Proterozoic stretches back billions of years before that. So, yeah. There was life for billions of years before we got sponges. Life had billions of years to increase the number of proteins that it could process and all those things.
So in all these billions of years of supposed evolution, we actually haven't increased the number of genes hardly at all. And a lot of the genes that they have that we thought at first was something specific to vertebrates or specific to higher life forms, they have them also. So the evolutionists...
They have them also, but there are more differences between theirs and ours. These ubiquitous genes differ in a way that strongly correlates with other ways that you can draw phylogenetic trees. That's probably not an accident, but there's no particular reason for a omniscient creator who's specifically designing these organisms to give them varying copies of ubiquitous genes in their genome, and then making the variation follow what looks exactly like you would expect if there were descent with common ancestry in all these lineages. That's... The only reason to do that would basically be to trick you into thinking evolution is true.
Right, yeah, and, right, yeah, it's like, if they have to make their god out to be a deceiver, they might want to rethink their theology, but, of course, you know, like you said, this isn't a channel about theology.
Right.
Scratching their head, the simplest cell is utterly complex. The simplest life out there is so mind-bogglingly complex.
And the simplest life out there has been evolving for, 3 or so billion years. Like, bacteria have been evolving for just as long as humans. If you were tracing the human line all the way back to, simple radial animals and whatnot, or even farther back into, the beginnings of eukarya. Like, the modern bacterium is not less evolved than the modern human. They've been evolving just as long as anything else.
That to me, it's impossible to conceive that it just spontaneously evolved from random chemicals. There is an unbridgeable gap between the simplest cell and random chemistry. It's sort of like saying, oh, well, we can find...
What is random chemistry? You ever heard of random chemistry?
I never have.
Chemistry is pretty darn deterministic. That's why you can do things like buy a chemistry set and produce predictable results every time if you do this experiment at the same time every way. So yeah, I don't know what random chemistry is, because as far as I know, it's actually not very random.
If you go out in nature, you can find a rock sitting on top of another rock, just from natural processes. You know, maybe fell off the cliff and landed on top of another rock. And because you can find rocks sitting on top of rocks, that explains the Great Pyramids.
No, we know the Great Pyramids were designed, but the thing is that rocks don't produce other rocks that then grow up into becoming adult rocks, and with those rocks there's genetic changes. All of these analogies about, oh, well, this thing that's extremely disanalogous to life has to be designed. Yeah, the descent with modification is an important aspect to evolution. If there's no way to get descent or modification, then it doesn't matter how much it had to be designed. It's not analogous to life.
Well, of course, that's ridiculous.
We have decay. We have the second law of thermodynamics. I look in the mirror every day, and it's hitting me with a vengeance.
I mean, it's actually not, though. Your body could produce more telomerase, and then you just wouldn't age or age as fast. There are, in fact, functionally immortal animals out there. But here's the thing. Your body doesn't do that. It could. It just doesn't.
Yeah, we've been told that if our theories ever run counter to the second law, we can be pretty sure they're not right. The second law basically tells us that at least a closed system, everything goes downhill.
Yep, and it's a good thing that the Earth isn't a closed system.
It's
also not really true that it goes downhill. It's that entropy will always increase. Entropy is a measurement of the ability of a system to do work. But hey, why actually bother properly defining scientific terms?
Fall apart. They don't spontaneously self-assemble over the long haul. The evolutionist tries to get out of this by arguing that the Earth is an open system, that energy keeps impacting on the Earth from the sun, and that this energy sort of drives the evolution uphill and causes entropy then to decrease rather than increase. This is really not a good argument. We know that energy is necessary for the assembly of complex things. That's true in an automobile plant. Without energy, the plant comes to a halt. But energy by itself is a necessary but not sufficient condition of, say, making automobiles. One needs information, you need programs.
But the thing is that energy is sufficient to explain various entropic processes, and one of the things you got to remember is life is an entropic process. It accelerates entropy in its local environment by taking advantage of energy gradients that are available to it. Sorry. So one of the things that you can actually get spontaneously are hypercycles, which are basically like cell membranes, but they can actually seek out energy sources and can metabolize energy sources. So that's a thing that can happen in dead matter. I don't see why that doesn't need to lead you to the, why can't life? And then that's abiogenesis. Once we get to the point where we're actually doing evolution, that means we're at the point where we already have something that counts as alive. And yeah, there are different definitions for what counts as alive, but one of the minima is that life has to be able to metabolize something. So before you even can say there's evolution, you're already at the point where life has overcome this problem of there not being a way to use the energy. So what uses the energy to drive evolution? Life does. Because otherwise it wouldn't be life, and it wouldn't be evolving.
You need sequences, things have to be done in a certain order, parts have to arrive at a certain time, have to fit other parts, there's an integration of complexity. Energy alone is not sufficient to explain it.
The Achilles heel in evolutionary theory is a lack of transitional species. There should be millions of transitional species there should be.
All right, I guess I have to do it. Give me a second, guys. I gotta pull up the video.
There's no transitional species. That's what the whole fossil record shows.
Yup. All right, guys, give me a second. It's coming.
Yeah. I really hate that argument.
Well, yeah, you should. All right, guys, here's a fun slideshow of transitional species.
Here we go.
I mean, this includes cephalopods, insects, mammal-like reptiles, dinosaurs, and things that aren't quite dinosaurs, ray fin fish.
And it's funny, because if they accept dinosaurs existed, and those are transitional species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, primitive tetrapods, things that aren't quite tetrapods. It's just all over the place. Turtles. We're at the turtle section. Snakes. Archosaurs. Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs getting into birds.
Dimetrodon.
Primitive synapsids, early artiodactyls, various primate groups, ferine groups, whales. That was a Sirenian. Otter. Horse. Yeah.
Now we're getting to the primates, which is our cousins.
Yeah, but there you go. There's my slideshow with... These were only the transitional forms that I could find reasonably good pictures that weren't subject to such strict copyright that I might get in trouble for.
Somebody left a comment saying, creationism is transitional between science and flat earth. That's funny.
Yeah.
The tremendous numbers of transitional species between the major groups of animals, but there aren't. In fact, you've got the Cambrian explosion where all the major phyla of life, the biggest differences that exist.
The thing is, everyone's like, oh, and we got a super chat for $4.99 US from Vandalia 1998. But Dapper, obviously, man-made objects are man-made, so that means creation, right? Yeah, it's true. I have some forks in a drawer, and they were designed, therefore, so was my hand, I guess. I don't know how that's supposed to work as an argument, but hey, you know, whatever, man. But the thing is that, like, okay, if you look at the very primitive basals, because we're not supposed to say primitive anymore, the basal members of all these phyla that you see in the Cambrian, you'll actually see that they're all very similar, much more similar than you might expect. Because the thing is that the farther back in time you go, the fewer clades have emerged, which means the higher rank those clades seem to us now. So, for instance, mollusks and arthropods share a common ancestor, and basically the difference between them in terms of their phylum is that arthropods developed segmentation and mollusks didn't. That was really the only distinction between them way back at the very base of those groups. So yeah, and then what makes something a chordate versus a versus like a sea squirt, which is a urochordate. Well, basically, chordates developed more of a notochord and stopped going through metamorphosis into an adult. Because a urochordate larva looks almost exactly like a very basal chordate. And also, chordates got a little bit more V-shaped muscles going down their segmented bodies. Like, that's not a big difference. That's because at this point, any little tiny difference would later on, at the point of, hundreds of millions of years later, become a very big divergence. Because as things evolve and other things go extinct, this difference between different groups that share common ancestry is only going to increase. They're not going to come back together.
Just poof, appear out of nowhere with no transitional species.
Well, they don't poof out of nowhere with no transitional species. In faft, we have Ediacaran biota that includes species that at least seem to be transitional between primitive, even more primitive Ediacaran animals and Cambrian animals. So
You've got Darwin saying that he's leaving up to future generations of geologists to discover all the innumerable transitional
the innumerable transitional species like the ones that you're showing right here, which are actually transitional between primitive single-shelled mollusks that were ground-based, and these are actually from cephalopods, which no longer have these straight shells, and most of them don't even have shells anymore. Yeah, I guess there are no transitional species like the one you're showing us.
species that must exist. But since the 1960s, the fossil record's changed by about 4%. So what they have is a handful of disputable transitional species.
Hundreds of undisputable. Okay, keep going.
Those transitional species they use today were not the ones they used in the 1970s. It's not the ones they used.
They use additional ones.
At the 1925 Scopes trial. It's not the ones that Charles Darwin had in his day.
Charles Darwin had virtually none. Like, he's basically getting everything about this sentence wrong.
Each transitional species seems to have a shelf life of maybe 10 years, and then it's kind of quietly shuffled off to the side, and they think of something else, and something else is brought up as a transitional species. I mean, you had the famous Evolution of the Horse series. Everyone remembers that, the little horse or the big horse. That's not found in the textbooks anymore, and if it is, it shouldn't be, because that's been routinely and soundly discredited.
So at the Arc encounter, they actually admit to horse evolution. It's because of the fact that they show like that at, they show about its hooves and whatnot. So yeah, and so I know that this came out before the Arc encounter opened. But it's just so funny how it's just so funny how that now YECs actually admit to transitional species of horses, but all that they'll say, oh, it's just a kind.
So what was that artwork about the Scopes trial? Yeah, so the Scopes trial, if I remember correctly, photographers were not allowed inside, and so what happened when pictures were made is that there were people sketching, basically. Which is actually still a fairly common thing you see in news reporting. So if I remember correctly, that was actually something that appeared in a newspaper at some point. Or maybe it was a book that happened later. I believe the drawing was actually fairly contemporaneous, though. And Unholy Roast, sorry that I beat you to it when saying that they were displaying transitional fossils while saying there weren't any, which was just great.
And a lot of the other things that people would remember as the best evidence for evolution really turned out to be no evidence at all.
Name one, please. Just name one that wasn't basically just a short-lived misidentification or hoax.
Charles Darwin did the same thing when he thought up his idea of evolution. He saw that the facts of the fossil record did not line up with his theory, and so he...
No, he saw that the facts of the fossil record did not yet confirm his theory. They were perfectly concordant with his theory. There's a big difference.
He also even got to live to see his theory proven like with Archaeopteryx.
Yeah. Well, that did come... Archaeopteryx was discovered a couple years after Darwin finally published. Yeah. So...
very unscientific decision, he decided to hold on to his theory and ignore the facts. The same thing happened in the 21st century. Mary Schweitzer said in Discover magazine, April of 2006, quote, "I had one reviewer tell me he didn't care what the data said. He knew that what I was finding wasn't possible. I wrote back and said, well, what data would convince you? And he said, none." End quote.
Okay, but now the scientific consensus is that what Mary Schweitzer found is at least chemical fossils, if not in some cases some original protein. So it's great that you found one obstinate scientist, but the field has moved on. There have always been obstinate scientists. I mean, look at Alan Fiducia. As far as I know, he's still trying to pretend that birds aren't dinosaurs. It's gotten to the point where now he's had to say that, like, therizinosaurs and dromaeosaurs, and dromaeosaurs being like the raptors, and like Gallimimus weren't actually dinosaurs either, They were actually flightless birds.
And yeah, and YECs love to cling on to him. But yeah, but there's a reason why that the scientific community doesn't take what he says seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the same thing that you get with this. It's like, yeah, it's not hard to find unreasonable scientists if you go looking. The question is that a problem for the field as a whole? And the answer is just no.
And so here's a perfect example of where people are saying, I have my unproved theory of evolution that spans many, many millions of years.
That is not what he was objecting to. I can pretty much guarantee you that this guy that you're complaining about was and still is someone who accepts evolution as a fact. Yeah. And of course, it doesn't help that we can't check up on this, because when you're quoting Mary Schweitzer, she doesn't give us a name. So, I'm not saying that that's, bad on Mary Schweitzer. Like, it's probably not a public correspondence. But the fact is that without a name, we can't even check to see if this guy has changed his name or his mind or not, if he's still in the field or not, what his other beliefs are. So it's just a worthless thing to bring up.
Years.
Oh, did you have something? I'm sorry.
Somebody in the comments said, Gallimimus wasn't a dinosaur? Jurassic Park lied to me!
Oh, no, it was a dinosaur. Alan Fiducia is just obstinately refusing to accept new data.
I'm sorry I'm sorry. I know you just put it back on play, but from my understanding, Gallimimus was like found like with feathers.
Yeah, Gallimimus had feathers.
And so I'm guessing like that this Alan character must be like a creationist of some sort.
The one that the one that Mary was talking to?
No, the one who was trying to prove that birds are not dinosaurs, and
oh no, he's not. He actually thinks that birds are pseudosuchians. He thinks they evolved from basal pseudosuchians during the early Jurassic.
And so what's funny is by the fact that he is actually not arguing for a young Earth. He is still arguing for an old Earth and evolution. So
right. All that the creationists ever do with his work is point out that he goes against the consensus that birds are dinosaurs, and they never bother to actually bring up what his actual conclusion is, which is not that birds didn't have reptile ancestors, it's that they did, it's just that they were pseudosuchians rather than dinosaurs.
That is too funny.
Yeah, so he basically thinks that birds and crocodilians are more closely related to each other than any of them are to any of the dinosaurs. Which, I mean, it's a hypothesis. It's been disconfirmed, but it's not an anti-evolution hypothesis.
There's no creator, no designer. It's just time, chance, and natural processes. But the facts don't line up with it. I'd rather hold on to the theory than the facts.
Many of the opponents of young Earth creationism point to young Earth creationists as being the enemies of science, that they don't think rationally and they actually stop good science being done. In fact, when you look at the really great breakthroughs of science in recent decades, very often you'll find those who made those breakthroughs were Christians and certainly understood.
Yeah, Christians, but they weren't anti-science morons, aka young Earth creationists. So...
the God of creation.
I mean, who can we name bigger, more influential than Isaac Newton? He was a Bible-believing Christian. Pasteur, Kepler. I mean, we're not just talking about...
were around before Charles Darwin.
Right. And they weren't, as far as I know, young Earth creationists. So...
mere Nobel Prize winners. We're talking about people that opened up whole areas of science.
Boyle, Maxwell, Faraday, George Washington Carver, Louis Pasteur, all of these men of science who are also men of God, who believe that in the beginning, God created.
So many people...
Yeah, but at no point in their scientific work did they base any of their ideas on the idea that the universe was specially created by an intelligent designer. They based their ideas on the data with the evidence. At no point did they say, well, because God created the universe, therefore I should expect to see this in electricity. Or this in, the motion of physics and gravity. or whatever else it is that they're studying. If God were some completely vital component to science, and these men of God are the great sages of science, then why didn't they use God as part of their scientific work? Because they didn't.
People think it's the religion versus science. No, it's the science built on one religion versus the science built on a different religion.
Evolution is not religion, though.
Yeah. Nor is... I mean, so... The thing is, no science is built on a religion. The most we can say is that certain religions are more or less conducive to allowing a society with scientific development. You can have a religion like, as it turns out, Christianity historically has been pretty open to allowing people to do scientific experiments. Other religions, that's not so much been the case, like Islam, where they've been historically much less willing to let those things happen. So, yeah.
And see, I start with the belief that God's word is true, that we have reliable eyewitness accounts of what happened in the past, therefore I build my science on that. Whereas an evolutionist has a belief in millions of years with no God, just everything happening slowly and gradually, and he builds his science on that. What most people have to decide which view is correct.
The search continued for Danny.
Or God, it's like, a lot of scientists, like Francis Collins, they're Christians who accept an old Earth and evolution. It's like, so what? So you're attacking some of the people on your own side?
There's one thing I do want to point out. So Mr. Flipside said Islam had a golden age. So there is actually some merit to that position. And one of the things is that the sort of dark ages in terms of scientific development in Islam happened after a fairly significant philosophical shift among Islamic theologians, where they basically abandoned the use of empiricism because it was thought to be a blasphemous denial of the fact that, according to Islam, only God knows the future. So that was a shift that took place. And so when I say certain religions historically, I don't mean in all of their various versions throughout all of the years. What I sort of mean is that if you sort of take Christianity as a whole, overall, Christian societies ended up producing more science and scientists than, say, Islam, and that there are theological reasons that, while not constant, are definitely a factor. So it's the sort of thing where you could write a whole thesis on it, but I'm trying not to do that, so. And we're going to skip ahead a little bit.
And deeper.
In the Bible, I really do. For instance, when you go to Job 40, there we have an account of God speaking with a man called Job, and this was after the flood. And he was saying to Job, look at this animal called behemoth.
Now that's just not an English word, that's just a transliteration of a Hebrew word. The Hebrew word there is plural, because behemoth is a well-known word for a beast. So behemoth is saying it's the beast of beasts, and God's...
Is that actually true? I guess I don't really care.
If he wants to show it to be true, well, then, he should check with any concordance about it. He should check with what the majority of biblical scholars agree with. And so, he needs to back it up.
Well, one of the things is I don't really care if it's true. And the other thing is it does follow a feminine plural pattern that's pretty common in both Hebrew and Semitic languages overall. So I'll just say, yeah, fine, whatever. It's a feminine plural.
Said to Job, behold this. So he was expecting Job to understand what he was talking about, and what I made along with you. So it implies that it was made alongside mankind. And then it says, so it's a beast of beasts made along with mankind.
Everything about it is big. His legs are big. His bones are strong like brass and iron. He's an enormous creature, chief of the ways of God. Some Hebrew experts say that means it was the largest land animal God made. And the largest...
That, though. It also says that he lieth under the lotus tree. And so it's big, but at the same time, though, it's not big enough, and like where it can't lie under the tree. If an Argentinosaurus were to try to do that, even while laying down, it would be impossible.
It's actually a little bit worse because the plants that it actually is said to hide in are reeds. You cannot hide a sauropod in reeds. I'm sorry, but the description puts an upper cap on the size limit, or on the size of this animal. It just cannot be a sauropod.
And it also says how it eateth grass like an ox, but we know the sauropods didn't eat grass because grass never even existed during the...
Oh, I do want to make one correction. It cannot be one of the large sauropods. There are smaller sauropods, like there's also instances of insular dwarfism in sauropods, so it couldn't be most of the sauropods just based on size. So I will say that. But yeah, the other descriptions all fit other animals better than they fit sauropods.
Land animal we know of today from the fossil record are some of your dinosaurs, like your sauropods, like a Seismosaurus or something. And then it has a tail like a cedar. Well, you think of the cedars 11.
No, it has a tail that moves like a cedar.
That doesn't say he has a tail that looks like a cedar tree. It's an action verb, not an adjective.
Actually, the sauropod tails only look like American cedars. They don't look like Middle Eastern cedars, because those are different species.
Yeah.
I mean, a tail like a cedar, that'd be an enormous tail. You know, many Bible commentaries, for instance, the NIV Study Bible in the notes actually says this was a hippopotamus or an elephant.
Yeah, because both of those fit the description better and are known to have existed in the time and place, or near the place where Job was most likely written. Whereas we have no physical evidence for sauropods. So I'll tell you what, when you find a, 3,000-year-old sauropod skeleton in the Middle East, get back to me, Ken.
And what it also says is that Behemoth lives in the swamp, like which we know that hippos definitely did. Scientists thought that for a while that sauropods lived in the swamp, but from my understanding, that is no longer the consensus.
Yeah, so the idea was originally that perhaps they were too heavy to survive outside of water for very long, sort of like a hippo, which does have that problem. But that is no longer the consensus. In fact, given how long their necks were, it's possible they may have even had trouble just breathing if they were in the water for too long. And also, we have tracks of them in environments where there were not sufficient swamps or lakes for them to be surviving in. And it's also the fact that they're extremely highly adapted to be large and terrestrial. They have what's called graviportal legs, which is a leg that's adapted to carry enormous amounts of weight. So everything about a sauropod we now know is extremely clearly adapted to living on land and not spending a whole lot of time in the water. It's not to say they never went in the water, because virtually every animal ends up in the water, or animals of virtually every species end up in the water at some point. And, so...
So we point out in the comments that when it's a talk about the sinews of his stones, it is interpreted as talk about his testicles, which on which it definitely is a agreed upon within biblical scholars that that is what it's talking about, is its testicles, and from my knowledge, sauropods didn't have visible testicles like that and whatnot, and so and when it's talking about its tail like a cedar tree, a lot of biblical scholars will agree that it's talking about its penis.
Yeah, that is another possibility, and in that case, even if the big straight tree is what's being meant here, well, okay, go look at an elephant penis. It's not exactly a small wispy sort of a thing. One of the reasons for this is that elephants, because they're so big, they can't actually use their hips actively while mating, because that would cause too much stress on the female elephant. So all of the thrusting action actually has to come from muscles in and at the base of the penis. So there you go. Fun facts.
But a hippopotamus tail is like a little flap of skin. And, an elephant's tail is like a piece of rope hanging in the wind.
It's really difficult to know why many commentators, even conservative commentators, are unwilling to take the descriptions in the book of Job about this creature and to try to apply them to a hippopotamus or some other animal when the description doesn't fit.
It does fit, though. That's the thing. That's why they do it. In fact, the part that's confusing as to why it goes back and forth between hippo and elephant is because the hiding among the reeds sounds like a hippo, but the nose-piercing snares sounds like an elephant. So that's the confusing bit. It's not clear which one it fits better.
And there's also no mention of a long neck, you know? Don't you think that's a really odd thing to leave out about a sauropod?
It is the most outstandingly unusual element of a sauropod, and yeah, there is no mention of it.
What's about a sauropod?
Yeah.
I suppose only they themselves know their motives and the Lord. Is it that they're afraid of looking foolish or, scientifically simplistic or whatever? But it is very clear that the description of the animal there in Job's book is not a hippopotamus.
When we look at the description of that creature, it really does seem to fit with a brachiosaur or a patasaurus, sauropod type dinosaur.
You read the description of behemoth while looking at a fossil at, say, the Pittsburgh Carnegie Mellon Museum of Natural History, and limbs like great bars of iron, That's exactly the way it looks. Doesn't mean the bones were made out of iron.
Also have big and strong bones too.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's like, okay, yeah, I don't think anyone thinks that these bones are being literally described as being made of iron. So yeah, all you're saying there is it has big, strong bones. When your normal method of comparison is to say like humans or dogs or other, like domesticated animals, then the bones of a hippo or an elephant are pretty substantial and strong. Nothing about this is indicative of a sauropod.
It means they were just like great big bronze tubes and iron tubes and these big ribs, this immense belly, this big tail. I mean, we're clearly not describing a pussycat.
No, I'll agree there.
This fits a dinosaur.
Well, Leviathan in Job 41 was not a dinosaur because technically the word dinosaur only refers to land animals.
Hey, Ken Ham knows more about dinosaurs than Kent Hovind does, so I'll give him that.
Give credit where credit's due.
Yeah. Well, although Kent Hovind is taken to saying that Leviathan is a T-Rex for some reason.
Yeah, and what's funny, even his son is saying the same thing.
Oh, is he really? Is Eric saying that T-Rex was Leviathan?
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Like father, like son.
Yeah. And unidentified Leviathan, I will grant you that Spinosaurus is a much better fit for Leviathan than any other dinosaur is. But the problem is that the description of Leviathan is not very indicative of Spinosaurus. And in order to make that a reliable... First, in order to say that the description of Leviathan is actually evidence for Spinosaurus in the area, it has to be much more specific. And without the specificity, in order to argue that that's the animal, you have to demonstrate that the animal was around at the time and in the place for people to know about it. Neither of which is the case. So there is no good reason to think that Spinosaurus is Leviathan, although it would be fun.
The other problem with Leviathan being a Spinosaurus is that there's no mention of a sail on its back, but at least that Leviathan being a Spinosaurus is a lot more plausible than a T-Rex.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, nothing about the Leviathan description sounds like a T-Rex to me, but...
A dinosaur-like creature, if you like, that lived in the sea. The Bible describes it as a dragon that lives in the sea.
This thing is about the size of a school bus and weighed 8 tons. And just as Leviathan is described as leaving a trail in the mud with, potsherds, like shattered pieces of pottery, that's the sort of trail that a crocodile makes in the mud. But you're not talking about the crocodile that we know nowadays. If you look at this picture of a modern-day crocodile skull and this Sarcosuchus skull around it, you can see the vast difference in size.
Okay. Like...
And?
Yeah, right. Like, do you have evidence that Sarcosuchus was around? I mean...
That time? Sarcosuchus went extinct a long time ago. And yeah, like long before the Book of Job was written. Now, would it be cool? Yeah, but what else don't realize is that a lot of the crocodiles around now, and even the crocodiles around during Job's day, I mean, to us, they were still pretty big. It's like, so what if they weren't big? Sarkasuka. It's like, still to us, still pretty darn big.
I'm going to say, so Unidentified Leviathan says, yes, there actually is a mention of a sail, as in shields on its back. Here's a problem, though. I think shields on its back is a much better description of bony scutes, which crocodilians have, and dinosaurs only a small subset of, or a couple of small subsets of them are known to have any significant scutes. And Spinosaurus was not in that group, so Spinosaurus probably didn't have any scutes. So, yeah.
But yeah, and the consensus from scholars is that Leviathan is just talking about a Nile crocodile. It's because that's what was around, at that time and in that area.
Right.
And a lot of them will just say that it's just written like in a very poetic and exaggerated way of a crocodile. Like, think of it kind of like when you talk about Mother Nature.
Right. Well, there's also the case that Leviathan is mentioned elsewhere in the Psalms when God is described as killing it. And there's a fair chance that Leviathan is actually based on the primordial dragon of the sea that you find in a lot of Middle Eastern ancient mythologies. So there's also that possibility.
And it truly fits the description in the Book of Job, where it talks about how, this sort of creature would just shrug off harpoons and arrows and laugh at fish hooks and things like this. And also, the Book of Job describes as if it has rows of shields closely interlocking with no space between them. And it's interesting that the description of Sarcosuchus includes the many scutes that have been found, and these are like the big scale.
But also that's true for every crocodilian, so...
And they are closely overlocking, and they're about 1 foot in diameter, these shields on Leviathan.
It says that it breathed fire. Now when people look at that, they say, well, now we know the Bible can't be trusted because that's just a mythical creature breathing fire. I say, whoa, wait a minute. Who says animals can't breathe fire?
Find an example of an animal breathing fire. I mean... Or find evidence that any animal did.
Well, he's going to bring up, I know he's going to bring the bomb-bitter beetle, but that's, I mean, it does breathe out like some sort of smoke from its rear end, but it's still not fire.
It's not, and the thing is, it requires very specific modifications to the anatomy, which in a beetle can be fairly cryptic because all the soft anatomy is on the inside. But that's not the case for, tetrapods. This kind of anatomy should be something that we would actually see some evidence for. Because a dinosaur doesn't have a lot of extra space to have sacs full of flammable chemicals. So it should have some skeletal mark that there were such things.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
We have a little beetle called the bombardier beetle.
There it is.
That can mix chemicals like hydrogen and hydrogen peroxide together and blast out hot gases at 212 degrees Fahrenheit to put a frog off its lunch.
You look at the electric eel, the ability to electrocute. You look at the spitting cobra that uses a huge gust of air from its lungs.
No one is arguing that animals can't use projectile weapons. It's not the argument anyone's making.
But the huge difference is an eel and a cobra do not spit out fire.
Right. Well, and the thing is like, okay, well, let's say that the dragon breathing fire is a legendary exaggeration of some more likely process, like spitting venom or spitting some hot liquid chemicals. Okay, great. But then that means that any of the other aspects of dragons that you think make them look like dinosaurs can also be exaggerations on some non-dinosaur animal. So it means that you cannot take these legends seriously as accurate descriptions of animals. So it's kind of a self-defeating point to make, but okay.
To really create an aerosol type effect for its venom that shoots out and will hit the eyes of attackers or enemies. You start looking at some of these things, you're like, okay, is it possible that these eyewitness accounts really did have some evidence behind them?
Interestingly, the snout of Sarcosuchus had a bulla, some sort of a hollow cavity of some sort at the tip that nobody knows exactly what it was for. Could that have been for...
Sorry?
And he is trying to argue how, because of the skull looks, therefore it breathed fire.
Right. So basically, I think the point is like, okay, so there's this little notch near I think it's near where the premaxilla interfaces with the maxilla. So you're saying that Sarcosuchus had flammable chemicals in fleshy pouches dangling from the bottom of its mouth? I guess I can't say it's impossible, but it seems like a very bad plan.
Mixing of chemicals or some sort of a chamber, some sort of a chemical storage chamber for generating the fire and smoke that the Book of Job also describes concerning Leviathan.
We have the eyewitness testimony of these dragons in the world after the flood, which fits them being on the ark with Noah.
When we're talking about dinosaurs and talking about dinosaurs as being on the ark of Noah, boy, immediately some people that don't believe that, their antenna goes up. They say, oh, dinosaurs are too big. They couldn't have fit on the ark.
That's not my big objection. My big objection is that the ark obviously never existed in the way that you believe it did. I don't care what animals you're going to hypothesize were on there. There is... I want to make this very clear. There is nothing about the young earth interpretation of the Genesis flood that is compatible with anything in reality. None of it. Every single step of the way is completely impossible. The only parts that I can make any kind of exception to is boats exist and things can live on them. That's it.
And that's it. And they also love to argue like about flood legends, but what they don't understand is that of course places are going to have legends of floods, because floods happen everywhere, and that's one of the only things that the flood legends have in common with the Genesis flood. And in one of those flood legends, even Bill Ludwig even talked about this in one of his videos. In one of those flood legends, it talks about a talking goat. I sure don't ever remember a talking goat ever in the Genesis flood account.
Yeah.
But let's think about this for a second. First off, what's the average...
I'm sorry, what was that? Sorry, say that again?
I said about the goat thing, I said that that's a pretty bad argument.
Oh, okay.
Size of a dinosaur. The average size of a dinosaur is like a sheep or a goat.
You know what? I looked into this, like, why do creationists claim this? Where did they get this idea from? There's no source for it.
So they pulled it out of there.
Yeah. I mean, it may well be true, but there's no source for it.
It's not like a big, huge...
I'll be honest, I don't really care the reasons why dinosaurs couldn't have been on a boat, because the boat didn't exist, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and see if they get to anything else.
T-Rex or a big, long neck. The main thing that God wanted to do was to have two of these creatures on the ark so that when the flood was over, and there would have been plenty of room.
I want to give my quick reasoning for why I don't care, though. Because, first, obviously the boat didn't actually exist in the way that they're describing this. Whether there was some kernel to the story, I don't care. It certainly isn't what they're describing. And the thing is that if the story were true, I wouldn't object to dinosaurs being on there. That's not a ridiculous part of the story compared to anything else. The question is, okay, even if all of this were true, you still don't have evidence for dinosaurs being the source of dragon myths. Because you don't actually have any evidence of dinosaurs existing in areas where these dinosaur myths were coming about. So even if all this were true, it still doesn't really make the case. And since it's not true, I just don't care.
For two of every kind of dinosaur.
Extinct by chance. I mean, a lot of them would have been wiped out during the flood, which...
Wait, that's not a dinosaur. That's not. It's hard to tell from this crappy image quality, but I think that's a Charistoderan?
I think so too, but like you said, it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly not a dinosaur. I can guarantee you that. Just the digit numbers are wrong. This number of sacral vertebrae is wrong.
I mean, that's like saying that you're going to talk about what a dog is. Like, say, the narrator is going to talk about a dog, and then they show a picture and then they show a picture of a hippo in front of it.
Oh, and Beej Price is here, by the way. I know you joined a bit ago, but it's nice to have you here. And she just got a recall notice on milk I bought. I think it might have hand sanitizer in it. That's gross. Also, that's why you mammals are weird for drinking like weird mammal juice. Just stop it. Don't drink mammal juice. Or do. I don't really care.
That's why we have the fossils and the survivors, which the Bible says were on the Ark of Noah.
Very large eyes, peering. Not anymore.
Dinosaurs were 4,000 years old. It would not be the end of evolution. Nothing.
Well, that's true, because it would just mean that some non-avian dinosaurs survived longer than was thought.
And what's so funny is that one of the guys being interviewed in this, Derek Isaacs. So when I was at YEC, I watched one of his sermons about dinosaurs, and then he was talking about how, oh, well, this one guy said that if dinosaurs lived with people, well, then evolution is blown out of the water. But then what's funny is that this guy, in his own documentary even, talks about how that would not disprove evolution. And so I just find that hilarious.
Yeah.
Will be the end of evolution except the return of Jesus Christ. Man simply...
That wouldn't even do it in and of itself. Because the return of Jesus Christ is not fundamentally incompatible with evolution being true. That's why there's all those Christians who believe Jesus is going to come back, but also accept evolution. So even that won't do it unless evolution is false, which, it isn't. So...
Cannot tolerate.
Isn't even foundational to Christianity. It's not what it depends upon, but yeah, let's go on.
A creator, because natural man, apart from having come to know Jesus Christ as Savior, we can't tolerate a creator because it involves accountability. And so we have to explain how we could come into existence spontaneously without a creator, without a designer, without a builder, how nature left to itself, matter, energy, time, and space, that must suffice. In fact, it's the whole philosophy of science nowadays.
No, it's not. It's just that so far, when we've been looking, we've found fairly consistently that there are non-magical explanations for things. That might not always be the case. It's actually possible that at some point science will hit some kind of brick wall where it's just like there are reasons to conclude that this is not possible. Good luck. That's a possibility. And even if it doesn't happen, it doesn't technically disprove God. So, whatever.
Scientists are no more objective than anyone else, and there's a worldview thing. Because
individual scientists aren't more objective than others, but as a group, they tend to be because they're so harsh on each other.
Flood account is true, it means that God has judged sin, which means we're accountable to him.
Okay,
and that is unwelcome.
The camera work on this is pretty bad, like how it's all zoomed in on him. Like,
oh yeah, framing is terrible.
Zoom out. It's like, the cameraman didn't know what they were doing.
Well, it could also just be the director is an idiot.
Yeah.
Because, if I'm a camera operator and I know what I'm doing, but the director tells me to do something stupid, I don't care. I'm just going to do something stupid. No one's going to blame me as the camera operator for the bad cinematography. Really.
Yeah.
And I doubt there was a specific cinematographer for the production of this. I'm pretty sure it was just the director and the cameraman.
For a lot of people,
it's not surprising to me at all that we are finding evidence of man and dinosaurs together, because if you take the creation account literally, then it says on the sixth day would have been the day.
Right, which there's lots of indications that it's not even how it was originally intended to be taken, but sure. If you do a stupid thing, you get to stupid conclusions. Yep.
That God created all of these animals, and man also. Therefore, they were concurrent. The dinosaurs didn't precede man by 1 million or 65 million years. They were on this earth together.
Once you look at the soft tissue, combined with the evidence for man and dinosaurs or dragons having interacted, boy, it all fits together.
It really doesn't, though. None of it does. It doesn't even come close, but we've already covered that.
I think want to back head against my wall.
Yeah.
evidence itself really fits together. The dogma of millions of years isn't borne out by the evidence, rather the evidence is forcibly smashed into that dogma.
That's what you call projection.
Evolutionary theory is driven by the paradigm and not by the evidence.
A lot of people, when they think of creationists who have science degrees, and they wonder how can they believe in creation.
Well, a lot of times they got the degree, if it's in a relevant field, specifically to try and defeat evolution, and they were lying about their actual positions during their defense of their thesis and whatnot. And a lot of them also have PhDs in unrelated fields, and then just use the prestige that comes with being called doctor to just speak outside their field. And then some of them aren't actually doctors in the first place. I think we all know of one prominent creationist who's a fake doctor.
What they don't realise is that creation is a logical way of looking at the world we have today in light of historical canon of the Bible. It all makes sense. Makes a lot more sense than from evolutionary perspective.
The reason why we have the Appalachian Mountains and the Himalayas is because of the flood and all the upheavals that occurred in the flood. Why do we have billions of dead things buried in rock?
No. And I love that we're going to get the billions of dead things.
Layers laid down by water over the earth, because the Bible says all the high hills under the whole of heaven were covered with water.
What about the animals in rock layers laid down by wind? What about them? Where'd they come from? The ones that are laid down by wind, in rocks laid down by wind, which are then covered by rocks that were laid down by water, which in some cases are then covered by rocks that were laid down by wind, which are again covered by rocks laid down by water. How did that happen? Because it did.
And all the animals were swept away, and the water would pick up sand and mud that would bury billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And so I hold to the view that the Bible tells us what happened in the past. We can test that, and we find overwhelmingly the evidence supports that.
I had actually, really felt that I was really something special, because I could tell God how he did it. I had put God in a box, and I'd say, yeah, God, you started out, but this is exactly how you did it.
No, if God did it, then the way he did it is the way that it's evident that he did it in nature. And if that's not evident, then God is just a trickster, and you can't say anything true about reality. Reality is prior to the Bible. It existed before the Bible, and because the chances that reality is real are essentially 100% unless we're going to go into solipsism, it is the basis on which you either check the Bible or your interpretations of it. So if you find reality contradicting the Bible, one, reality is right, and two, it's either time to admit the Bible was wrong or that you were wrong about it. And I'm sorry, apparently there's a helicopter flying 2 feet outside my window. I don't know if you can hear it, but you probably can.
Honestly, I never heard anything.
Oh, apparently it's not being picked up. Apparently it's under the noise gate level. So, sorry for complaining about something no one else is experiencing.
It's all good.
Evolution. Now, when that was pointed out to me, it hit me right between the eyes. Boy, how arrogant. And then he started pointing out the evidence, much of the evidence.
What's up?
About that. There's nothing arrogant about believing that, there's nothing arrogant about believing theistic evolution.
No. Or evolution in general.
We've been talking about today, and this evidence is just stacking up, proving that the Bible is true.
It is. Is there something?
I like fossil, how that animal got to be the way it is. But there are underlying meanings that go to the very core of our being, that answer life's big questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? What's the meaning to life? What happens after I die? These big questions are answered by creation information.
Today, I find that the biggest objection people say as to why they can't accept Jesus is because they've been taught evolution at school of the millions of years, and they say, why should I trust the bits of the Bible that talk about...
All right, I think we're now getting into the part where they're just preaching. So I think this may be it for this video, because I don't really want to talk about all of their preaching, because I don't care. I care in some ways and not in any way that's relevant to the channel is basically what I'm saying. So If we have any final comments, concerns, questions for either me or Eric, please put them in the chat. Sorry. In terms of channel news, tomorrow we are going to see the return of Len Kurt Knoll. We're going to be talking about astronomy news. I want to talk about the goings-on at Betelgeuse, these strange objects that have been found near Sagittarius A star, the black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And then just some general, what has Landon been up to in his work and all that stuff. Then Monday, you can look forward to the next episode of Creationism and the Big Bang, a show which so far hasn't actually dealt with the Big Bang at all because creationists are super bad at figuring out what scientific theory goes with which ideas. Then Wednesday, there is going to be a live stream here on this channel with Cheshire and Erica from Gutsick Gibbon. That should be a lot of fun. Those are... Yeah, every time I'm on with either of them, we have a blast, and I think you guys are pretty big fans too, so that should be fun. Friday, we have another Kent with Bent episode planned. This is Kent with Bent 14, the Lennoxville Horror. And I'm hoping to have another scripted video out between that Wednesday and Friday, so look for something on Thursday, but it's not a guarantee because it's just going to depend on how busy I am, how much script writing I can do, and all that stuff. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff on the channel, and I'm looking to see, I think I will only say Beetlejuice once more, and I just did. Monk Mayfair. Let's see. I'm not seeing questions, so I think we should be good. Eric, do you have any announcements that you want to make? Anything you want to plug?
Shoot, not really. I'm trying to think about what my next episode of things that... Oh, yeah, so that reminds me. So, Dapper and I have actually been talking. I actually thought that it would be kind of cool is if I would have Dapper do an episode of things that piss me off. I would imagine that you're probably going to do one about young Earth creationist or something like that. And I mean, you could do any topic that you want, but yeah. So we are currently talking about that, and I am definitely going to be doing a review of Sonic the Hedgehog when that comes out, and
okay,
and that's really all that I got planned as of now.
All right. We do have a question. Do I taste like ostrich? I haven't eaten myself, so I can't say for certain, but probably. Also from Vandalia 1998, today between 4 and 5, I'm not sure what time zone that is, but check Vandalia 1998's channel. I'm interviewing fishermen for my podcast if any of your audience is interested in fish. So if you're interested, go check that out. The channel is Vandalia 1998. If any of my mods want to grab that link, pop it in the chat. I think that's pretty much it. The only other thing I can say is please remember to like this video, leave comments if you can, share it, and if you want to do anything to more directly support the channel, there are links in the description to several ways to do so. There's an Amazon wish list, there's a merch store, and there's Patreon. And if you have any interest in any of those, I really appreciate everyone who gets me anything on Amazon, who buys any of my merch, or who pledges on Patreon. And if you were pledged on Patreon, you could actually watch Monday's video now.
Awesome.
Yeah, you could have watched it since, I think, Thursday or something. So, yeah, I mean, there are also successively better tiers and everything. So, you can get in the end credits, you can get thanked by name. If you go up high enough, I'll even give you a 3D model of the Dapper Dinosaur. So, there you go. I think we are going to cut it off. I will see all of you hopefully tomorrow and Wednesday and Friday because I have so many streams scheduled. Thank you all.
Thank you.